We've done the 80s, we've done the 70s, and now we go back in time once more to do 25 of the best albums to come out of the 1960s. You're not going to want to miss this, so do not go anywhere. Hey, what's up? I'm Jason, and this channel is for vinyl lovers who want to find something new to listen to, purchase, or avoid. I focus on vinyl, but everyone is welcome. Let's jump right in. The 60s was an explosive decade. Recording technology and creativity collided at a perfect time, helping to create an explosion of innovation that hasn't been matched since. It's impossible to contain all the magical music that was produced, but we're gonna try. Believe it or not, I have 25 albums to show you, and my list doesn't even begin until halfway through the decade. This list reminds us just what the music world was like in the second half of the 1960s, when masterpieces were literally hitting record shelves every single week. The only rule I imposed on this list is that I didn't want to show a band more than twice. In past lists, I tried to keep it to one record per band, but that was just way too difficult in this list, where we could easily have picked 3, 4, even 5 albums from some of these bands. First up, we have the Rolling Stones' 1965 album, Out of Our Heads. This is the US edition, of course. This is really the album that begins to give the Stones their personality. Up to this point, and even including this record, the Stones were largely a blues, soul, R&B cover band, but the US version of Out of Our Heads includes their breakout tune, Satisfaction, which became their first #1 hit in the US, incidentally ranked as the second greatest song of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. Okay, right into 1966 with the Rolling Stones again, this time with Aftermath. This is the moment the Stones began to rival the Beatles. It's considered something of a breakthrough for the Stones and is their first album to feature all original tunes, all credited to Jagger and Richards. The record includes a range of styles beyond their heretofore blues and R&B roots, including pop, folk, psychedelia, and even Baroque and Middle Eastern music. Depending on which side of the bed I wake up on, this is at times my favorite Stones album. All right, let's talk about Love. This is Da Capo, their second record, and it's an album, in fact, a band that I was completely oblivious to until about 4 or 5 years ago. When I discovered Love, I had to ring up my dad and ask, why was I never informed about Love? And he just laughed. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of 60s music, but he always held a little bit back, you know. He couldn't have me knowing everything he knew. And I think most people that have heard of Love know about their third album, Forever Changes, which is also a fantastic album. This is Donovan's third studio album called Sunshine Superman. This is a great psychedelic album that contains rock, folk, and pop, all with a psychedelic flair. This is another album I only really began to explore about 5 years ago. And are you like me that sometimes for whatever reason you imagine you're not going to like something despite never having heard it? And then the stars line up and you take a chance, and sometimes you are very, very happy you did? This is one of those albums for me. Okay, this is an album that should really be on your radar if it's not already. This is East West by the Butterfield Blues Band. This album features the guitar talents of Mike Bloomfield and Elvin Bishop. In 1965, when Dylan historically went electric at the Newport Folk Festival, to the disappointment and anger of much of the audience, Bloomfield was on guitar. This album features 2 extended jams, including East West, which is a killer psychedelic blues tune which uses elements of modal jazz, of course, made famous and influenced by Miles Davis. Bloomfield, one of the great guitar players of all time, has a very original sound, which you get to hear in all of its glory on Butterfield's East West. All right. Inspired by the Beatles' Rubber Soul, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys went on to create one of the greatest albums of all time, Pet Sounds. I mean, what can I say about this album? I absolutely adore this record. Well, here, let's do this. This is an all a cappella fan mix of Pet Sounds. If ever there was a reason to release an album like this, Pet Sounds is that reason. It's absolutely beautiful. You get to hear the Beach Boys harmonies and all of their glory here, and this album is very well done. This isn't the easiest album to find, but if you can pick one up, it's well worth it. It's called Pet Sounds, The Vocals Only. Here we are, the last album on my 1966 list, and we have many incredible records to go, but not before we talk about the man himself, Frank Zappa, and the Mothers' debut, Freak Out. This record contains R&B and doo-wop inspired tunes, orchestral arrangements, and avant-garde sound collages. The lyrics, like much of Zappa's songs, are pop culture influenced and are very much a part of the time. In this case, a backdrop to mid-60s culture. Zappa's next couple of Mothers albums are a bit like sequels to Freak Out, but in my opinion, this is Zappa's early tour de force. It's January 4th, 1967. This is the year that will come to contain the Summer of Love, and we're kicking it off right with an LA band you may have heard of called The Doors, and this is their debut self-titled album. With this album, we get Break On Through and Light My Fire, two 1960s anthems, but this album is a masterpiece from cover to cover. This is a 1973 Japanese pressing, complete with Obi strip, and it's just beautiful. This pressing has a demand rating on Discogs of 682%, one of the most in-demand records in my collection. Let's jump right into another killer album in 1967. This time we have Cream's Disraeli Gears. This album topped the charts from the UK to Sweden to Australia and the US. It contains two psychedelic blues powerhouses, Strange Brew and Sunshine of Your Love. This band took the label Power Trio to a whole other universe, with Eric Clapton on guitar, Jack Bruce on bass, and Ginger Baker on drums. I'm not sure Cream ever played a bad note, and this is an album you simply must have in the collection. Alright, let's shift gears a little bit. This is Country Joe and the Fish's Electric Music for the Mind and Body, another debut album. This is one of the handful of top San Francisco bands to make a real impression on the psychedelic zeitgeist. This is a beautiful record. Both of the Fish's first two albums are mandatory listening. This is a great one to put on late at night and just fall asleep to. I mean, we already had debut albums by Frank Zappa, The Doors, and Country Joe and the Fish. How were we possibly gonna compete with that? Well, how about a little guitar player from Seattle, Washington called Jimi Hendrix? I feel like each of the other albums on this list moved the needle for music in the 1960s, but this one blew the needle clean off the thing with the needle on it. Anyway, one of the greatest guitar players of all time, Purple Haze, Hey Joe, Foxy Lady, Are You Experienced? Yes, please. So this was a hidden gem for me, another record that I was completely oblivious to until about 5 years ago. This record blew my mind when I first heard it. I'm talking about The Left Bank's Walk Away Renee, Pretty Ballerina. This was another one where I was like, Dad, were you gonna tell me about this? And while he was familiar with Walk Away Renee and Pretty Ballerina, because they got a ton of airplay back in the day, he wasn't familiar with the album, and the title songs aren't even my favorite. I love Barters and Their Wives, I've Got Something on My Mind, and Let Go of You Girl. If you don't know this one, it's definitely worth checking out. All right, we're still in 1967. I haven't even mentioned two of the biggest, most influential records from that year. Well, how about Sgt. Pepper's? But seriously though, I mean, what can I possibly add that you don't already know? Earlier I said that the Beach Boys, and by Beach Boys I mean Brian Wilson, were influenced by the Beatles' Rubber Soul when creating Pet Sounds. Well, the Beatles, and by the Beatles I mean Paul McCartney, were influenced by Pet Sounds when creating Sgt. Pepper's. It's those kinds of rivalries and competition that really allowed some wonderful and creative albums to get made. This is the 1976 EAS pressing. If you watched my Revolver Japanese pressing shootout, then you know how the EAS fared. I won't give it away, just know that this EAS pressing sounds really, really good. Alright, this record is a real banger and sort of a holy grail for me. This is a beautiful 1973 Japanese pressing that has the peelable banana in very good condition. There's a little rubbing right here, but this is an album that I heard for the first time over 25 years ago, and it was in a crate of records under our stairs, and after listening to it for the first time, I was like, okay, this is the record that influenced almost all of the post-punk and alternative music that I was listening to all throughout the 80s. This is a killer pressing of a killer album. Woo, okay, it's 1968. Let's kick off the year right with another incredible record. How about Jimi Hendrix Electric Ladyland? This double LP was Jimmy's third and final studio album. It's such a beautiful album. I mean, all of Jimmy's albums are beautiful, but this one is so great to just put on, cozy up, and chill out to. I just love the second disc, which has Rainy Day, Dream Away, 1983, A Merman, I Should Turn to Be, Moon, Turn the Tides, Still Raining, Still Dreaming, All Along the Watchtower, and Voodoo Child. Man, what a treat. Jeff Beck's Truth with Rod Stewart on vocals, as if you didn't know. This is one of those albums where, you know, back in the 80s or early 90s when I was just trying to find anything new to listen to, I snagged a copy from Amoeba in Berkeley and immediately fell in love with it. I haven't had it on vinyl in a very, very long time, and you might have seen me unboxing this in my last video. I'm very happy to have it back in the collection. This is a Japanese pressing with a very sweet obi strip. If you look close in the background there, you can see Jeff Beck illustrated there behind the text. Just super cool. They did this obi right. This Japanese pressing does this phenomenal album justice. All right, Traffic, self-titled. First of all, I love Steve Winwood. He was famously in Blind Faith with Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker. And I mean, he was more than just in the band. He wrote what are, in my opinion, the best 3 tunes on that record. He went on to have a very nice career as a solo artist in the 80s. And in between those 2 careers, he was in a little band called Traffic. No big deal. And their self-titled album is a great 60s record. Bluesy, folky, and funky. If I'm being honest, I don't currently have a copy of Blind Faith, or I may have picked that one, but this is still an awesome album. This album never ceases to surprise me. Big Brother and the Holding Company, Cheap Thrills. I guess I talk this one up a lot because I feel like this is an underappreciated album. Despite the crowd noises on here, this is actually a studio album, but it just rocks. It actually sounds live, and it doesn't really matter either way. This is just good old-fashioned rock and roll with top-notch musicianship and incredible vocals of Janis Joplin all over it. I love the guitars on here. I think that's the thing that continues to impress me about this record most. Just bluesy and psychedelic. Don't pass on this one. Just because you can buy this record all day for $10, it's worth its weight in gold. I'm so glad I get to talk about this album. This is Albert King's Live Wire Blues Power, recorded at the Fillmore West in San Francisco in 1968. This is exactly what an electric blues album should be. Albert King is one of the most underrated bluesmen of all time. I mean, he gets his credit, but he deserves more. And this record is a clinic in blues guitar and just how to conduct a live blues show. The audience is putty in his hands from start to finish. I can never get enough of this album. I put it right up there with the best blues albums of all time. It's fantastic. So if you find yourself flipping through records and you see Quicksilver's Happy Trails, you might say, what's up with this cover? You might be curious enough to flip it over and see that side 1 is a suite of tunes based on Bo Diddley's Who Do You Love? And you might be really tempted to put it back and keep on flipping. I'm here to tell you that this is the album you never knew you needed in your life. This album was also recorded at the Fillmore, this time Fillmore West and East, and it's a psychedelic, rockin', good time, and is one of my favorite albums. Man, here we are, finally at 1969. So many great albums. It must have been so great to be a teenager in the late 60s with all these gems coming out one after another. Well, 69 was no exception. Let's kick it off with a classic and another debut album, Santana's self-titled. Again, what can I say? This is just Latin rock psychedelia at its best. I mean, Santana just hit the ground running with this album. No warming up in the bullpen or anything, just a rocking, festive album that will have you moving and shaking all your body parts all over the place. I just love it. All right, another one of my all-time favorite albums, Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. This is a lot of people's entry point into the world of Frank Zappa, and it's not a bad place to jump in. In 2019, on streaming services, I'm not even sure it came out on CD, they released the Hot Rats Sessions, which is outtakes and isolated sections, which I think is really cool if you're into that kind of thing. My favorites are It Must Be a Camel outtakes and rhythm tracks, just very, very cool. This is a phenomenal album. A 60s list would not be complete without a little Grateful Dead, and here's Live Dead, the Grateful Dead's first official live album recorded and released in 1969. I love all of the Dead's official live albums, and this one is an incredible time capsule of the Dead's early live shows, from the side-long Dark Star to St. Stephen into the 11. It's just a beautiful album. This is one album where listening to the CD or streamed versions can add to the experience because the tracks are so long and flow into one another. A vinyl side just cannot contain them. All right, barely squeaking into the 60s is Led Zeppelin's second album. The astute observer will note that I erroneously included this album in my 70s list, but hey, October 22nd, 1969, I'm gonna count it. I think this album is pretty well recognized as the band's heaviest album. We got 6 Zeppelin compositions and a few Chicago blues by Willie Dixon and Howlin' Wolf. It reached number 1 in the UK and US, and the album design was nominated for a Grammy. This album is the gift that keeps on giving. All right, let's wrap it up, this time with an album that keeps coming up for me. It's the Beatles' Abbey Road. I just love this record. It is so locked in on being what it set out to be. It's so consistent. I just love it. It's amazing to think that the band was basically falling apart during these sessions. By the time the album was released, the Beatles were a thing of the past. And again, another reminder that the 60s was out of control with all of the top-notch music that was released in that decade. All right, there it is, 25 fantastic albums from the 1960s. I just touched the tip of the iceberg here. What did I miss? What albums are on your top 25 60s list? If you like this video, then you'll probably like one of these videos. I love if you consider subscribing. It helps the channel more than you know. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on a single video or live stream. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.